Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. We're still in the Hypershade. I know that it seems like we've been here for a long time, but if you look at this list of Hypershade utilities alone, there's so much to cover here, and my goal is to cover everything. Now, that's not to say I'm going to stay in these utilities for the next year, covering each and every one of them, but I just find it so interesting, and I hope you guys also find it interesting. And we will, of course, branch out of here and move on to other things and come back to this, sometime in the future. But I just want to keep showing you some things that I feel like are useful. So, with that in mind, today I do want to go over a new Hypershade utility. The one I want to talk about today is Remap Color, or Remap RGB. If I scroll down here through my utility list, and you can get to this utility list by clicking on Utilities here on the left side of the Create area. This is like a filter or a category. Whenever you select things in here, it'll filter your results of the kinds of things you can create to that type of thing. So by clicking on Utilities, I'm filtering all these results on the right to only show me utilities. So I'm going to scroll down here, and these are all in alphabetical order. So we get down to the remap nodes. So we have remap color, remap HSV, and remap value. So these are relatively similar in that they remap something, right? Let's look at remap color first though. I'm going to left click on remap color to create it. So this gives me a remap color utility. Over here is my property editor. I'm going to make this bigger because there's a lot of stuff in here that I wanted to touch on. Okay, but first of all, what we have here are remap color attributes. So it's looking for a color, and over here you can see the input into this utility node on the left side is looking for the color. And then we have red, green, and blue sections that each have their own graph. So what's going to happen is a color or a value, and it's a vector value, so it's an RGB value, gets plugged into the remap color utility, and then it takes the colors, or the red values, the green values, the blue values, and you can adjust each of those color channels here within the utility to change the hue of the red channel, for example, or the green channel or the blue channel using these graphs. And you can kind of see up here this little preview of how colors are changing based on what I'm doing here, right? And we're going to reset all this in a second. But once you do all that stuff, then you have the out color. The result of that remapping can be plugged into a material or whatever. So let me go, since I messed with this, so I'm going to delete it and make a new one. Remap color. So I recently used this utility actually in a demo. I did a demo for my class showing how to apply a label to a wine bottle. Now we're not going to do that full demo right here, but I wanted to show you how I use this particular utility in that demo. I'm going to go to my surface category to create a Lambert material. This will be the material that we're working with mainly today. I'm going to apply a file texture to the color of this material. So over here on the right side in the property editor, I can map the color by clicking on this black and white checker button next to color, map the color with a file from my computer. You can see here a file node is created as out color of the file is plugged into the color of the material. So this file, I can click on this little yellow folder and find the texture I want to use. This is the same thing you would do for any project where you wanted to apply a texture to a channel. You would apply a file to it and it would go find your texture. Okay, so I have this bottle label texture. If I click on this little circle button with the S on it, that's the solo button, and I can see it here in my material viewer. I can solo that texture and get a good look at that texture by itself without anything affecting it. So this is my wine bottle label. So what I did was also applied an opacity or transparency texture to this material so that only the wine bottle label would show and all this black area around it would be invisible. So I'm going to click on my material here to select it. I'm going to map the transparency channel with the texture just like we did before. Click on this checkerboard button next to transparency. We're going to map it with a file. So a second file has now been plugged into the transparency of the material. And for this file node, I'll browse to my bottle label opacity texture. You can see it here next to my color texture over here on the right. So this is an opacity or transparency texture where everywhere this image is white, that is what's going to be opaque or not see-through, and everywhere where this image is black will be transparent. So I'm going to select this texture, hit open, and now that applies it to my material. Now right now my color texture over here is solo, that's why we're seeing it here. If I click on the S button to unsolo it, now I can click on my material and we can see that material preview here. You can see just that label is showing up. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do in my demo was I wanted to make this Lambert material, and the Lambert material we've talked about in other material videos, but the Lambert material does not have any kind of shininess to it, and I wanted this label to not just be a matte finish, not just have no shininess at all. I wanted to have some shininess, so I wanted to change this Lambert into a blend. The way to do that, I'm going to click on this blue button right here next to the preset button. Because this is the property editor, it's not showing us the full lists, the full attribute editor list here in the property editor. But if I click this little button, it will toggle between the property editor view and the actual attribute editor. So I'm going to click on this button here, and now you can see my view becomes expanded, all these options. And here I have the type of material I have, which is a Lambert, and I can click on this pull down menu and choose a different kind of material, and it will change this material into another kind of material. So if I chose a blend material, which is a shiny material, left click on blend, my material changes into a shiny blend material. You can see that here. The label is still opaque, everything else is still invisible, but everything is shiny now, like a shiny ball with the specular values. And because we're not masking that specularity, even the invisible areas of the material are still shiny, right? So what we can do is we can use this transparency texture, and I'll solo it again so you can see it. And wherever it's white currently is where it's opaque, wherever it's black it's transparent, right? Well, we can use this same texture to drive or mask our specularity so that everywhere where it's white, the material is shiny. Everywhere where it's black, the material is not shiny, and therefore we can make it so that everywhere that the label does not show up, you do not see this specular shine happening. So the way to do that, if I have my material selected, I scroll down here, and you can actually click this blue button to go back to the property editor view if you prefer that arrangement of attributes. They're the same attributes either way, it's just a different way of displaying them. So here's the attribute editor, and here's the property editor display. So with either way, we're looking for the specular shading section of the material, and the specular color is what we're going to apply our file to. We can use the same file. You don't have to use a second or third file to mask this specularity. So with the blend selected, the blend has to be selected first so I can get to my specular color attribute here. I can middle mouse click, again middle mouse click, and drag this file to over here, and you can see that when I mouse over these attributes, my dotted line indicates which one I'm kind of dropping this texture on top of. I'm going to drop it right here on specular color. And now once I've done that, you see in my preview here, all that empty space is no longer showing a specular shiny value, only the label is. But now I have another problem where the label is very shiny. Now I wanted to have some shine to it, that was the point, but I didn't want it to be that shiny, okay? But because my texture is being used for multiple things, it's being used as a transparency mask, which requires the texture to have a full white value here. If this value was more of a gray tone, then that means the label would be semi-transparent. It wouldn't be completely opaque because it wouldn't be completely white. Okay, only a completely white value is opaque, and a completely black value is completely see-through. That's how the transparency texture works, or opacity. But if I want to use the same texture for specular, then it has to remain full white for this area and full black for this area, and therefore the way that is interpreted by the specular color channel is full white means full shininess, and full black means no shininess at all. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So what I decided to do then, because what I could do is go back into my Photoshop program and make a whole new mask texture just for specular color. That's definitely something you can do. You can take this image into Photoshop, make this white a little bit more of a darker gray, for example, and then you have a lower intensity specular for the label. However, this video is about Remap Color, right? So I'm going to use this utility to darken my transparency map and plug the out color of this into the specular color. So you can see here my transparency texture, or I should just say my mask texture, since I'm using it for more than just transparency at this point. You see I have a line going into transparency here, and then I have another line going into specular color here. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to drag the out color from my file into the color of my Remap Color utility like that. And so that texture information is going into the color of this Remap Color utility. And from here, I can go into my red, green, and blue channels and remap it. I can adjust these graphs to change the red, green, and blue channels of that image. Now, because this is a black and white image, I want to keep it black and white. A gray tone, a grayscale image is what's used for specular color. Although that's not completely true, you can tint a color into your specular color, and then that specular will take that color, just so you know. For the sake of this demo though, I'm going to keep it a grayscale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this selected value on the far right. Now if you have a hard time selecting these, what you can do is click on this arrow button next to the graph, and it will give you like an expanded view of it like this. But what I want to do is click up here, and you can see I can have this dot that I'm selecting. That's by default up in the upper right corner. I'm going to bring this dot down, and that's, you can see the representation of this graph lower down like this. So the selected value, and this is a range from 0 at the bottom to 1 at the top. I'm taking this number down. Let's say it would take it down to 0.25. Let's type that number here and hit enter. I can close this. And we do the same for these other two. So for red, and we can actually see what happens if I solo the Remap Color utility node. We can see the effect this is having on that texture. So you can see it became a blue tint to it because I've lowered down the red channel. I'm going to do the same value though, 0.25 with all three channels. So I'm going to click on this little circle in the upper right corner to select it. You can see there I can click and drag it. But instead of dragging it down and kind of eyeballing it, I want to type in the value I want, which is 0.25. Hit enter. You can see the color change again because again I'm remapping these colors. I'm going to click on this one. I can drag it just to make sure I do have it selected, because if I don't select it exactly, you can see if I click like right outside it, I actually make a second or a new point on the graph. I don't actually select the one that's up here. And if that happens, you can click the little X underneath it to delete it, and then click in here and just drag it. Just make sure you have that one point selected, and then the selected value I can make 0.25 like so. So now all three have the same adjustment made to all three channels. And you can see that the result on the texture. If I solo the original one, you see full white and full black for that transparency use. But then for the Remap Color, I've made that white darker, more of a gray color. And I can even take it lower actually for the purposes of what I want to do, which is to make the specular highlight on the label not nearly so bright. So I can select this point. Instead of 0.25, maybe I can do like 0.15 and do that for all three. You select the dot first and then change the selected value, 0.15, hit enter. So now you see my gray tone is much darker than the original one, which is fully white. So I can unsolo now the original one, and I'm going to plug the out color now from the Remap Color into the specular color like this. So now I can look at my label and you can see that that shininess is not nearly as bright as it was, right? So if I drag the out color from my transparency texture and plug it directly back into specular color like it was, you can see the difference. Make sure I have that selected. There it is. Out color from the Remap Color node into specular color, you can see that diminished greatly, right? Because I darkened that image through the Remap Color utility and then plugged that into the specular color instead of going into Photoshop and making a whole new texture or a whole new mask for this label. I can just use the same mask I had for transparency, darken it or change it however I need to with the Remap Color utility, and then plug that output into the specular color of the material. So you can see my specular values, it's definitely shiny, but it's not overbearingly so. I could probably even take that down even more just to give it just that slight kind of high gloss paper sheen that I wanted for my label for my wine bottle. And then to do so, you just click on your Remap Color utility again. You can again just click on the little dot, make a change to the selected value. Let's say I go 0.05. We're going really low down. We're going to lower it quite a bit. Now, if you do make the numbers a little bit different, like you see here, I misclicked and typed 0.052 and not 0.050. You can see now my specular has that kind of blue tint to it, which that might be something you might want to do. You might want to have a little bit of a kind of velvet sheen to it. That's up to you. I'm going to change that back to 0.05. Select this one, 0.05. There we go. So I still have just a subtle shininess in there. You can see it, but not nearly as much as it was when I had it going straight from the file into specular. Again, I keep deselecting it by accident, but here we go. You can see this is without any adjustment from the Remap Color utility, just straight from the original mask. Then I into the Remap Color and out to specular, and you can see that adjustment made to the specular of the label. So Remap Color, this is what it essentially does in a nutshell. I mean, we kind of went through it relatively quickly, but this is what it does, though. It takes the colors from the input, remaps those channels, the red, green, and blue channels, and changes those intensities and hues and such, and then outputs it into whatever you want. So this is just one use of it. Now I do want to show you a bit more of an unorthodox use for the Remap Color utility. So I'm going to make a new scene. Click the new scene button. Don't worry about saving that. I'm going to go back to my Hypershade by Panels, Panel, Hypershade, like this. If you ever have something in your work area that you don't want, like this for example, if you select it and then up here there's this button, there's these two buttons here. One's got a plus sign, one's got a minus sign. Click on the minus button. It will remove it without actually deleting it. Okay, so it still exists in my Maya file, but it's no longer showing in my Hypershade work area. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Utilities over here, and again click on Remap Color to make it. So scroll way down here, Remap Color. So like I mentioned before, these values are vector values. Okay, so a vector value has 3 values. RGB can also be mapped as X, Y, Z. X, Y, Z are actually 3D coordinates in space. Okay, so let's just say as an example, what's a use for that we can do with 3D objects and their positions. I have a viewport tab here so I can see into my scene. I have a little window. I can make this a little bit bigger so we can see a little better. So I'm going to create 2 objects. So I'm going to create polygon primitives. I'll just make a cube. Doesn't really matter what it is. Okay. And then I'm going to say create a polygon primitive, and let's do a cylinder. And I'll make the cylinder kind of long and skinny. I'll hide the grid for now just so I can see these better. So I have a cylinder and a cube. So what can we do with this? Let's just say, for example, you're seeing you have 2 objects and you wanted one of your objects to be in the same place as another object, but you didn't want to have to go through a lot of hassle to try and get it to be exactly where that object is. Like, for example, let's say I want it to be kind of like this, but you see they're not exactly in the same place. I want it to be exact. So what I can do is go do some connection editor magic and use the Remap Color node to make one object have the same position as another object. Okay, so to do that, I have my Remap Color here selected. I'm going to deselect everything. So I'm going to left click off in space somewhere, so nothing's selected. And then here in the Hypershade window menu, go to Window, Connection Editor. You can also find us under Windows, General Editors, and then we can find Connection Editor right here. Connection Editor right there. But here in the Hypershade, you go to Window, Connection Editor. You can find it there as well. So what we're going to do here, what the Connection Editor does, and we've talked about this briefly in the past, but on the left side, you can load something that you select on the left and load something else on the right. And then you can connect different attributes together where the one on the left will drive the one on the right. So what I'm going to do is click on the cube, and say reload left. So here's my cube and all of the cube's attributes, there's a ton of them. There's more than you would think just for the cube. And then I'm going to select on Remap Color and say reload right. So this is my Remap Color's attributes. So what I'm going to do then is connect the translation from my cube, the translate XYZ. Let me go open the channel box just so you can see that here. And I'll push this in a little bit. So the position of my cube is to translate X, Y, and Z value. So if I move this cube around, you can see these values up here change. X, Y, Z is a vector value. That's a 3D coordinate. X, Y, Z can be remapped as RGB. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to scroll down here in my cube section. This is the P-cube one on the left side of my connection editor. I'm going to look for the translation attribute, or translate. Scroll down. Here we go. Translate right there. I'm going to left click on translate. Now because translate is a vector value, it requires it to be connected to another vector value. And on the right side, you see lots of things gray out because they're not vector values. But one thing that is a vector value is the color input of the remap color. So I click on color, they connect. Okay. If I click on remap color over here, you can see now my color is this light blue color because that's the RGB value that we're seeing here. And it's been mapped. That's what the little black arrow means, is that this attribute has been connected with something. So let me close this for now. So if I click on my cube here, you can see my translate X value is negative 0.273. Click on this, and you can see here in the remap color attributes, color R, color red, is negative 0.273. My color green is 7.585. The translate Y of my cube is 7.585. So those attributes have been linked together. Okay? All right. So the next step, I'm going to now link the out color of the remap color to the translation of the cylinder. Doing the same thing. So I'm going to go to Window, Connection Editor. Now this time we're going from the remap color to the cylinder. So you can see here this from to. So from is on the left, to is on the right. So I'm going to select my remap color, reload left. Select my cylinder, reload right. And so over here on the left side, we're going to choose the out color. And again, out color is a RGB value or a vector value, and only other vector values can connect to out color. So all this stuff grays out because only vector values can be done. So anything that's not grayed out is a vector value. So we're looking for the translate value of the cylinder. I click on that. Okay, and now hit close. So what's happened now is the position of the cube is being fed into the remap color utility, and then the output of the remap color is being fed into the translation of the cylinder. Okay, so now you can see as I start moving the cube around, the cylinder is definitely jumping around and kind of jerking around and doing little things, but it's not actually following the cube exactly. And why is that? Well, let me move the cube way out here, for example, and look at the cylinder. You see the cylinder is going from translate X, Y, and Z is all 1, 1, 1. So it's capped at 1. So why is that? Let's look back at the remap color. And let's I'm going to make this window a little bit bigger so we can see. Scroll down here. So what does this mean? It should be the expectation is that the input from the cube is being fed into the remap color and it's remapping the XYZ value of the cylinder. But if we scroll down here below the RGB channel stuff and look at input and output ranges, let's open that up and look at it. So input minimum and maximum, output minimum and maximum. So the output maximum is 1. That's why the cylinder is capping out at 1. The output maximum is capped at 1. And the input maximum is also capped at 1. So no matter what I do with the cube, it's only reading it up to 1. So let's say, for example, the output maximum is, say, 1,000, for example, and then the output maximum is also 1,000. Now we're getting closer to what we're looking at here. Let's move this back down some. So now when I move the cube, the cylinder's moving with it, right? However, what happened now? Because I moved my cube into negative values, what's happening now? See, this is capped out at 0. Go back to my remap color, look back at the ranges. My input minimum is 0. My output minimum is 0. Let's say for example, my minimums are now negative 1,000. So I'm going to type in negative 1,000 and then negative 1,000 for output. And now, as long as I keep my cube within 1,000 square units, that cylinder will now follow that cube no matter where it goes. And that's using the Remap Color. And again, making sure you adjust these input and output ranges. But using that and the connection editor, I've now connected this cylinder's translation to the cube's translation in that way. So that's just one of those little unorthodox ways of using the Remap Color utility node. Overall, this is really handy. It's most likely really handy for the first demonstration, using it to adjust your textures and things. But this is also a really cool application of it, and you never know, you might find a situation where this might be useful. I don't know. I just thought I would show it to you. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. This has been the Remap Color utility for the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. I'll talk to you later.